You know Billy the Kid, the most famous outlaw of the Old West. 21 years old, 21 kills, a heroic death. That's what the movies told you. Here's the problem. That kill count was made up by a ghostwriter. The heroic death was an ambush in a dark room. The 21 facts I'm about to show you won't destroy Billy the Kid. They'll replace him with something more interesting, a real human being. Fact 1. Not even. His real name is known for sure. The most famous outlaw of the Old West doesn't have a birth certificate. Think about that. No one knows for sure what his real name actually was. Records from the time list at least 4 different names: Henry McCarty, William H. Bonney, William Antrim, and Kid Antrim. The name Billy the Kid was just a street nickname. It never appeared in any official document while he was alive. And the confusion doesn't stop there. Where was he born? New York, Indiana, Kansas. Historians have been arguing about it for more than a century and still haven't reached an agreement. Even his birth year changes depending on the source. It could be 1859 or 1861. We're talking about a guy who became a national legend, had movies, books, and TV shows made about him, and we still can't confirm even the basics. The whole foundation of this story was built on unanswered questions. Fact 2. His mother dying when he was 15 was the real turning point. When Catherine McCarty died of tuberculosis in 1874, Billy was around 14 or 15 years old. And this is where the story really changes. His stepfather, William Antrim, didn't want anything to do with the boys. He simply handed Billy and his brother Joseph over to neighbors to take care of them. Imagine that. You're a teenager, you lose your mother, and the guy who was supposed to raise you abandons you. Billy went to work washing dishes in hotels and restaurants to survive. Less than a year later, he was already arrested for the first time. And the detail most people don't mention is that he didn't even commit the crime. An older guy stole some clothes, and Billy was just there at the wrong time. But nobody cared about that. In that New Mexico, there were no social workers, no juvenile courts, nothing. A kid with no family became the street's problem, and the street doesn't forgive. The kid's outlaw life didn't start with rebellion, it started with abandonment. Fact 3. Billy was around 15 years old when he ended up behind bars for the first time in Silver City, New Mexico. The reason? Clothes and cheese that an older guy named George Schaefer had swiped from a Chinese laundry. The problem is that Schaefer hid everything in the place where Billy was living. The kid didn't even know where it had come from. Sheriff Harvey Whitehill showed up, saw the goods, and arrested Billy by association. Years later, Whitehill himself wrote that he never believed the boy was the real thief. But the law was the law, and someone had to answer for it. Billy didn't stay there long enough to get used to the cell, though. He found a chimney in the jail building and escaped through it. A kid too skinny for a chimney to hold. That was his first recorded escape. And it all started because of some cheese he never stole. Fact 4. Before he became a legend, Billy the Kid was just a skinny teenager who kept getting beaten up by the same guy. Francis Cahill, an Army blacksmith at Camp Grant, Arizona, was bigger, older, and loved humiliating the boy in front of everyone. He would shove him, knock him to the ground, call him kid, like he was talking to a dog. Nobody did anything. Until August 8-7, inside a saloon, Cahill threw Billy to the floor one more time and landed on top of him. This time, Billy pulled a pistol and shot Cahill in the stomach. The man died the next day. The local jury called the shooting criminal and unjustified, even with witnesses saying Cahill started it all. Billy ran before he could be arrested. By today's standards, a lot of people would say it was self-defense. But in 1877, That shot turned an intimidated boy into a fugitive. Fact 5. A lot of people think the Lincoln County War was a battle between good guys and bad guys, but the truth is a lot less romantic. In 1888, in New Mexico, two groups of merchants were fighting over a huge contract, supplying goods to the Army at Fort Stanton and to the Apache Reservation. On one side were Murphy and Dolan, who already controlled the market. On the other were Tunstall and McSween, who wanted a piece of the pie. And where does Billy fit into all this? Tunstall was the only one who gave the kid work and respect when nobody else wanted anything to do with him. Simple as that. When Tunstall was murdered, Billy didn't pick up a gun for ideology or justice. He wanted revenge for someone who had treated him like a person. The so-called regulators weren't heroes. They were pawns in a money war between men in suits who never got their own hands dirty. Fact 6. This changes everything you've ever heard about Billy the Kid. During the Lincoln County War, he wasn't an outlaw attacking the system. He was the system. Billy was part of the Regulators, a group officially appointed as deputies by Sheriff Dick Brewer. With the approval of Justice of the Peace John Wilson, they had badges, legal authority, the whole package. So when they went out killing members of the rival faction in 1888, they were technically carrying out orders within a recognized law enforcement structure. The problem is that the other side also claimed to have legal authority. It was lawman against lawman, each group with their own paperwork and justifications. Nobody there was clearly the good guy or the bad guy. The whole war was a political and economic conflict where the law served whoever paid more. Billy became a criminal not because he acted differently from the others, but because his side lost. Fact 7. You've probably heard that Billy the Kid killed 21 men, one for each year of his life. It's the kind of story that sticks in your mind, but the people who came up with that number were Pat Garrett and Ash Upson, the writer who helped put together the biography published in 1882, right after Garrett killed Billy. The two of them wanted to sell books, and a nice round number with that kind of symbolism was perfect for the marketing of the time. When historians went looking through the actual records, court documents, witness accounts, military records, the count dropped dramatically. The consensus today points to somewhere between 4 and 9 deaths that can be directly attributed to Billy. The number varies because in several shootouts during the Lincoln County War, there were multiple shooters firing at the same time, making it impossible to know who hit who. The confirmed minimum includes Wendy Cahill and 2 law officers. Garrett knew the truth didn't sell as well as the myth, so he chose the version that made the better headline. Fact 8. Most outlaws of the Old West could barely communicate with the Hispanic communities around them. Billy the Kid was different. He grew up around Mexican families in New Mexico and learned Spanish naturally, speaking it with a fluency that surprised any Anglo-American in the region. This wasn't just some interesting little detail. It was a survival advantage. The Hispanic families of Lincoln County hid Billy, fed him, and warned him when the sheriffs were getting close. To those communities, he wasn't a criminal. He was an ally against the Anglo-Americans who controlled the territory's politics and economy. The nickname they gave him was El Chivato, the little goat, and it was used affectionately. The detail that stands out is that this part of his story, his real connection with the Mexican people, barely shows up in any major American movie. Fact 9. In 1879, Billy the Kid made a deal with Governor Lew Wallace, the same guy who later became famous for writing Ben-Hur. The deal was simple. Billy would testify against the killers from the Lincoln County War, and in return, he would get a full pardon. Billy kept his end of the deal. He turned himself in, testified, and waited, but the pardon never came. Billy wrote at least 5 letters to the governor asking him to keep his promise. Silence. In 81, already sentenced to hang, Billy sent one last message saying he was sitting there under a death sentence, despite the agreement they had made. Wallace didn't answer. He was too busy taking care of his literary career. That raises a question most people don't talk about. If the governor had kept his word, the whole story would have been different. Billy wouldn't have escaped, wouldn't have been hunted down, and probably wouldn't have died at 21. His fate was sealed not by a bullet, but by a broken promise. Fact 10. Here's something Hollywood never gets right. Before Pat Garrett became sheriff, he and Billy were partners. They hung out at the same saloons in Fort Sumner, played cards at the same tables, and shared the same circle of friends in the local community. It wasn't some distant relationship. People who knew them at the time described it as a real friendship. Then came the election of November 1880. Garrett won the job of Lincoln County Sheriff with a clear mission: capture or kill Billy the Kid. The guy who used to sit across from him playing poker was now his official target. 8 months later, in July 1881, Garrett walked into a dark room at Pete Maxwell's ranch and pulled the trigger. He killed a man he had shared meals and laughs with. The story they sell us is about a brave sheriff taking down a criminal. The reality is that one friend killed another. Fact 11. A lot of people picture Billy the Kid as some ignorant kid who could barely hold a pencil. Hollywood loved that version. But the New Mexico archives hold something that changes everything. Letters written by Billy himself to Governor Lew Wallace. And they weren't scribbles. He built arguments, negotiated terms, and expressed himself clearly. His spelling varied, but that was normal back then, even for educated people. In 1880, a note he wrote to a friend showed steady handwriting and well-structured sentences. So why did they sell the idea that he was illiterate? Simple. An outlaw who can think and write is more dangerous than a dumb gunslinger. It was easier to reduce Billy to a brainless savage than to admit he was smart enough to negotiate with the territory's own governor. Fact 12. Think about a guy who became one of the most recognizable faces of the Old West. Now imagine that maybe we don't even know what he really looked like. The 1880 tin type, the classic one of him holding a Winchester rifle, was accepted for more than a century as the only legitimate image of him. But when experts at the University of New Mexico did a digital analysis in 2010, the result was inconclusive. The proportions of the face didn't really match. In 2011, a second tin type showed up after being bought for $2 at a flea market in New Mexico. The image supposedly shows Billy playing croquet with Pat Garrett and other people he knew. If it's authentic, it's worth millions. But to this day, no one has proven anything definitively. The fact is, one of the most famous outlaws in American history may be someone we've never truly seen. Fact 13. In 1949, a 90-year-old man named Ollie Brushy Bill Roberts showed up in a small Texas town claiming he was Billy the Kid. According to Roberts, Pat Garrett killed the wrong guy that night in 881, and the real Billy simply disappeared into the world. What caught people's attention is that this man knew things about the Lincoln County War that almost nobody else knew. He went to the governor of New Mexico asking for an official pardon, but the governor refused to meet with him. And here comes the chilling part. In December 1950, during the very meeting where he was finally going to try to be heard, Roberts dropped dead of a heart attack. Did the truth die with him? Maybe not. In 2003, The sheriff of Lincoln County wanted to exhume Billy's supposed grave in Fort Sumner to compare DNA with relatives of the McCarty family. The neighboring county blocked everything, afraid of losing the tourists who visit the grave. Fact 14. Not many people know this, but there was a moment when Billy the Kid tried to leave it all behind. In 1879, he made a deal with Governor Lew Wallace. He would testify about murders in exchange for a pardon. For about 3 months, Billy lived in Fort Sumner, leading a normal life. He worked as a cowboy, played cards at night, and went to dances in the local Mexican community. No robberies, no shootouts. It was the longest stretch of his adult life without any involvement in crime. But Wallace simply never kept his end of the deal. The pardon never came. And when Billy realized he had been used and thrown away, he went back to the outlaw life. Not by choice, but because the doors that existed for him had closed. Hollywood never shows this phase, because 3 months of quiet living doesn't sell tickets. But that's exactly where the story gets truly interesting. When he had a real chance, he tried to change. Fact 15. There was nothing heroic about the night of July 14th, 1881. Pat Garrett didn't face Billy the Kid head on. He was hiding inside Pete Maxwell's room in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, waiting in the dark. Billy walked into the room not suspecting a thing. He had gone there only to talk to Maxwell. When he noticed a silhouette he didn't recognize, he asked in Spanish, "¿Quién es?" "Who's there?" Garrett fired twice. The first shot hit Billy in the chest and was fatal. The second missed. Billy was 21 years old. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't get a chance to react. He didn't recognize who shot him. He didn't say any dramatic last words. The most famous death in the Old West wasn't a noon duel on a dusty street. It was a quiet ambush in a room with no light. And that changes everything Hollywood told you. Fact 16. Billy the Kid was killed in July 1881. In less than 6 weeks, New York publishers were already selling cheap booklets telling versions of his life. Pat Garrett, the man who pulled the trigger, released a biography the following year. The detail is that the preface itself admitted the story had been dressed up by ghostwriter Ash Upson. Why the rush? New Mexico at the time was desperate to attract investors and settlers to the territory. Gunslinger stories sold newspapers back east and created curiosity about those lands. New York wanted adventure, and New Mexico wanted money. Billy became a product before he had even been buried for 2 months. Each new book made the myth bigger. Then came the movies. The legend we know didn't appear on its own. It was put together piece by people who had a lot to gain from it. Fact 17. Before he became the most famous outlaw of the Old West, Billy the Kid was just a kid in Silver City, New Mexico. And here's the part that gets you. The people who knew him back then didn't remember him as a troubled boy. Just the opposite. Neighbors and acquaintances described him as polite, helpful, and well-mannered. Susan McSween Barber, who knew Billy during the Lincoln County War, said he was a good-hearted young man who didn't look for trouble, but didn't run from it either. Sheriff Harvey Whitehill himself, the first man to arrest Billy in 1875, admitted years later that he never believed that boy was truly bad. To him, it was the system that shaped what Billy became. Think about that. A boy who lost his mother young, had no support, and was pushed into the margins. The real story is a lot more uncomfortable than the Hollywood version. Fact 18. Hollywood has made more than 50 movies about Billy the Kid since 1911. And here's the detail most people never stop to think about. None of them come close to the real story. Not even Young Guns from 1988 with Emilio Estevez, which defined an entire generation. That movie made up characters who never existed, scrambled the order of events in the Lincoln County War, and turned Billy into an action movie hero. Sam Peckinpah's Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, released in 1973, has a feel that's closer to the period, but even so, it leans more on the legend than the facts. And why does nobody tell the story the way it really happened? Because the truth doesn't have the ending Hollywood wants to sell. A poor kid who lost his mother young was betrayed by the governor himself and died in an ambush in the dark doesn't make the kind of script that fills movie theaters. Fact 19. In 1879, Governor Lew Wallace made a deal with Billy the Kid. The offer was simple. The young man would testify about crimes he had witnessed during the Lincoln County War, and in return, he would receive full immunity. Billy kept his end of the deal. He testified before a grand jury and gave the prosecutor the information he needed, but Wallace simply never honored the agreement. He went on with his career and eventually became famous for writing the novel Ben-Hur. The detail most people don't know is that the deal was never canceled by any official document. In 2010, Governor Bill Richardson considered granting a posthumous pardon, but backed down. In 2023, Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham also reviewed the case without making a decision. To this day, New Mexico carries a legal loose end with a man who died more than 140 years ago. Fact 20. Here's something most people never stop to think about. Everyone who knew Billy the Kid said the same thing. The guy was left-handed. He drew and fired with his left hand. But in that 1880 tintype, the only confirmed image of him, the rifle appears in his right hand and the revolver is on the left side of his body. It seems like a contradiction, but there's a technical explanation. Tintypes produced reversed images, like a mirror. Nobody corrected that back then, so if you flip the image, the rifle moves to his left hand, exactly the way the accounts described. In other words, the image the whole world uses to picture Billy the Kid probably shows him backwards. The face is his, but the orientation is flipped. It's like looking at someone in a mirror and thinking you really know them. Fact 21. His death made Garrett rich and later ruined his reputation. Pat Garrett pocketed $500 for the death of Billy the Kid. Sounds like easy money, right? But that shot came with a price he didn't expect. Much of New Mexico, especially the Hispanic community that admired Billy, came to see Garrett as a coward who shot a friend in the back in the dark. In 1882, he lost re-election as sheriff. He tried cattle ranching, worked as a customs inspector, organized horse races. Nothing worked out. In 1908, Pat Garrett was shot in an isolated field in New Mexico during a land dispute. He was 57 years old and broke. The guy who killed Billy the Kid died poor and forgotten. Billy the Kid had 2 protruding teeth that no Hollywood actor has ever shown. He lost his mother at 15, was arrested for a crime he didn't commit, killed in self-defense, was betrayed by a governor who promised him a pardon, and died in an ambush in a dark room at 21. This isn't the story of a romantic rebel. It's the story of a teenager the system had no place to put and didn't know what to do with, except destroy. What remained was the legend the system needed. The real man stayed buried in Fort Sumner,